Also in attendance is my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Jennifer Potter, Commissioner Leo Suncian, as well as our staff. We're also joined by, I see now, Dina Sheen is here from the Consumer Advocates Office and Scott Glenn from the State Energy Office. Purpose of our status conference this morning is to discuss reliability issues regarding the AES coal plant on Oahu, including actions to resolve the issues with this plant that have experienced in the past few weeks, Hawaiian Electric's scheduled maintenance plans, contingency options, and Hawaiian Electric's responses to our recently issued information requests on the New Year's Eve conservation call. Before we begin, I want to briefly discuss the format of the status conference. We're hosting this through WebEx for the docket parties and other status conference participants. We're also live streaming this on our YouTube link provided in docket number 2021-0024, which is also on the Commission's website. We're recording the status conference, and that recording will continue to be available on our YouTube channel. I think I went over the per the agenda filed in the docket earlier this week. We're going to start with presentations from Hawaiian Electric and AES. And we'll follow with questions from Consumer Advocate, State Energy Office, and then the Commission. So with that, unless there's any questions, we will start with the presentation from Hawaiian Electric.
Thanks, Chair Griffin. I'll kick off. Thanks for this opportunity to have this discussion, a very important discussion. I'm Shelley Kimura, President and CEO as of January 1st, and just wanted to make a few introductions of the key participants on our side for this morning, since we've had a few changes in our team. So the key people that are going to be speaking today or participating and have responsibility for these areas is first Jim Alberts. He is now our Chief Operations Officer. Reporting to Jim is Bob Eisler. He continues to be our VP of Power Supply, and Bob and his team are responsible for the maintenance schedules, and so that's a key part of the discussion today. We also have Kevin Saito, who is a director and responsible for system operation across our 5 islands, and he's the one responsible for the day-to-day, really minute-to-minute operations of our system. We also have Colton Cheng, who continues in his role of Senior Vice President of, I'm going blank, of Planning and Technology. And, you know, Colton is responsible for the long-term planning of our system, which, you know, as opposed to the day-to-day planning of the system. And he's also responsible for the procurement of new resources, including many of the projects that we are focused on over the next 2 years, 3 years. And reporting to Colton is Becca Dehuff Matsushima, who is now the Vice President of Resource Procurement, responsible for those resources. We have lots of other people on the call who have really important roles, and we work as a team to work on these issues, but just wanted to highlight those in the interest of time. You've asked us to talk about the plant and unit specific details of our maintenance schedule, so we're going to do that. We also will cover the contingency plans, assuming AES doesn't continue or we assume that AES is offline. And so we'll show you what that looks like based on our current maintenance schedules, and then we'll talk about what are some of the levers we have and that we're looking at. And then lastly, you asked us to look at what happened on New Year's Eve. So we're actually going to start with that because we think that gives a good foundation for how we look at these things that will help everybody understand when we start talking about the maintenance schedules and what it looks like without AES. So with that, Bob is going to be our main presenter this morning. There's been a cross-functional group of executives and team members working on this, but Bob will present for all of us. Thanks, Bob.
Sure. So we can go to the first slide and start. Okay, so this is a graphical way to look at the system, and let's set the context of where we were the morning of December 30th. So the way to look at this is there are the 2 blue horizontal lines. That gap represents, if you take every generation asset we have on the system and said it was available, and you subtract what we predict the peak to be for that night, that's that value. So on December 30th, that was 852 megawatts, including an assumption that we'd have 72 megawatts of wind at the peak and 10 megawatts of DR. So this is our forward-looking, what we think it's going to be like at the peak. And then, of course, all of our units aren't available. Some are out on maintenance. So you can see there's 4 of them that were out on maintenance. So that takes up part of that gap. We have various D rates on some of Hawaiian Electric units as well as H-Power, detailed a little bit more over to the right, but that takes up part of that. So what's left there is a margin of 386 megawatts. Is 386 megawatts of margin good? Yeah, that's pretty good. If you look at the little collection of items at the upper part of the blue line, you see the different conditions. So condition A or B, that's where we want to be. That's where we strive to be. That means that we can lose the largest unit that's running on the system unexpectedly, and still manage to supply the system with the amount of regulating reserve that we need. If we can't actually accommodate loss, so the largest unit, we get into condition 1, where we start thinking about actions that we might take for the evening, and then we go into other 2 conditions. Once we get to condition 3, you'll see that there are more. We actually really start taking action on some of the things like calling for conservation, but we'll get to that. So that sets the baseline where we were December 30th. So pretty good place. If you go to the next slide. So then at 8:20 on the 30th, K5 tripped due to a control system malfunction. So the things that changed are in red. So you can see how that changes it. I think the key part here is that margin reduced to 266 with that forced outage, still in condition A, or alpha, we call it, but A, and so we're still pretty good. Moving forward to the early morning of December 31st at 4:45 a.m., this is when AES had a boiler tube failure and told us they'd have to come down half plant outage. So they were going to be down 100 megawatts. So once again, that reduced our margin, predicted margin for that evening to 166. So we're still in the green as far as being condition A, but certainly getting closer to it. Of course, one of the things that changed on this, you'll see, is the largest unit's now not AES anymore. It's a little bit smaller unit, which would be, in this case, Kahe 6. Okay. If you move forward, then at 7 in the morning, H-Power called us and told us that they were going to have to bring one of their boilers down, primarily due to lack of fuel. Being the holidays, they weren't getting as much trash to their plant. They were going to have to shut down one of their boilers, and told us it wouldn't be available for the peak. So the outlook at this point at 7 in the morning was that when we get to the peak, that we were going to be just into condition 1, 139 megawatts of margin, meaning that we wouldn't be able to handle loss of the largest unit. So at this point, we start thinking about things that we can do to increase that margin for the night if we can. But then, like 2.5 hours later, we were able to get Kahe 5 back online, granted derated. So it wasn't the full Kahe 5, but we were able to get some back, increase that margin to 214. So once again, looking okay for the evening peak, not necessarily looking to take actions to increase that margin significantly. So we thought we were good, and then early afternoon, about 1 o'clock, I think 1:10, that's when Kahe 6 had a steam leak, and we were looking at having to bring the entire 142 megawatts of Kahe 6 down. Now, AES fortunately was able to provide us 4 more megawatts than they had earlier, so that was helpful. But we also, at this point, had a reevaluated the predicted peak for the evening, as well as what we thought we'd get for wind. And you'll notice that wind is now only 13 megawatts instead of 72, as it was the day before. If you recall, New Year's Eve, the wind kind of died down a lot that day. So we were looking at this point of having a margin of only 27 megawatts. That's not a lot. That puts us into condition 3. That triggers some automatic action for us, and looking at things that we can do to increase that margin. And it also triggers a call for conservation if we can't increase that margin. And so at this point, this is when everybody is on it, and we're having frequent discussions with the corporate communications folks, with Scott Sue, who was CEO that day, with Shelley, who was going to become the CEO the following day, Jim Alberts, everyone, trying to figure out what we're going to do and what actions we're going to take. So we were very busy looking at what the possibilities were. Unfortunately, if you go to the next slide, at 4:30 p.m., none of those things that we were looking to do for the peak were certain yet. We were making progress, but none of them were certain. So it still looked like a worst case scenario is we might be around 27 megawatts of margin. At this point, we issued the call for conservation, because if we don't get that call out before the 5 o'clock news, then it pretty much doesn't do any good. So that's kind of the deadline. We're working really hard. We didn't get everything that we wanted to by 4:30. So we made that call. Turns out a lot of those things that we were working on, we were able to do. And we ended up with a margin of 123. Why? Because YL7 had a D rate that really was a D rate for a continuous operation, but we were able to do some manual bypassing of the problem for a short period of time during the peak to get an additional 51 megawatts. H-Power gave us an additional 5 megawatts. K6 had already, and what we did with K6 is we evaluated it and we said, we don't actually have to take the unit down. We're going to have to derate it just for the peak. We evaluated that it was safe for people and for equipment. And we said, hey, we can stick around at about 103 megawatts through the peak, and then we'll shut down after that. And turns out as I said, the margin was 123. So we ended up having a good deal of margin, but I think it was prudent to make the call for conservation at the time we did, because once again, that's a tool that has a timeline on it. As far as did we get a lot out of the call for conservation, it's hard for us to measure that exactly. We probably got a few megawatts out of that. I think typically we might get, up to maybe 5 megawatts. New Year's Eve is an odd night, but I think we got a couple, but we can't measure that exactly. So that's a quick visual synopsis of what happened and the process that we go through with something like that. With that said, then let's move into looking at our maintenance schedules for 2022 through 2024. And this chart should look familiar to many of you. On the bottom, we have different blocks that show the height of those blocks is the amount of megawatts of a unit that we take out for maintenance, and the width is the time that it's out. The blue line on the top it's similar to the slides I was showing before. That represents that distance between the two blue lines before. That's all of our capability minus highest predicted peak for that month, okay? One difference is this blue line does not include the benefits that we get from DR. And from other measures we have that might be things that we can use temporarily during a peak, but not all day. So that's the line there. Now you'll notice this line takes into account adding 4 of the projects, the stage 1 and stage 2 projects that are underway. They're all listed there. The dates listed there are approximate. In some cases, I used a little bit of conservative date just for conservatism and showing you the presentation. And then, of course, AES is scheduled to retire at the beginning of September. That's where we have the big dip. Now, let me explain something about these boxes too. So, or our maintenance. We have 12 steam units in our fleet, and we try to do a major overhaul on each of those units once every 9 years. A major overhaul is a multi-month, like a 4-month outage, We open up the turbine, we look at it, we open up, lots of things in the boiler, we do work on the generator, things that we don't necessarily do on a regular annual basis. Those outages, of course, also include all the maintenance that we do on a regular annual basis, as well as it's an opportunity to fix things that are on the punch list to get fixed, when we have an opportunity. And so you can see, I know it's a little scrunched. Becca, maybe you can click on the 2022 number. Here's just the 2022 schedule. Maybe it's a little easier to see. So you see that WIO8 is on its overhaul. That's the long one. All the other units get at least one outage in the year. Typically, that's like a 4 or 5 week outage because we do have work. And then, of course, the IPPs, like KPLP, are in there. H-Power does things a little different. They have a few little blocks in there. Typically, you would see AES with a large block in the first quarter of the year. But it looks like AES probably isn't going to necessarily, and I don't know, this hasn't been 100% confirmed, but may not be taking an annual outage this year. And so we scooted some things in place of that, like where Kahe 3 is. So that's what our maintenance looks like. If you can just click on the 2022 again, Becca. So just going back and looking at the 3-year view, every overhaul that we would do is on here. Every planned maintenance that we would do is on here. And so there's no work deferred in this. But we did adjust, as we've talked about, the September-October timeframe of this year of maybe having 0 planned maintenance, because that's when AES first goes away. And that's when loads typically are the highest. One more thing I want to point out on this before we leave it is, you'll notice that the blocks, the height of the blocks in 2022 has a downward slope as the year goes on. That's not by accident. That's because the loads typically will increase, as the year goes on. And so we accommodate that to try to keep that gap between the top of the blocks and that blue line, to try to optimize that. Looking at this, it can be a little bit hard to do the calculations of the white space. And so we created another chart. If you click on the thing that says blue line and chart, I'm sorry, go back up, see where it's, yeah, right there. If you click, go back up and do that again. Or just go to a couple slides. There we go. So this is a graph showing that white space. So the white space is represented with the distance from the x-axis up to the colored line. It gives you a better feel of how that's actually changing throughout the year. And it also shows you where we're adding the projects and deleting them. So, the beginning of the, early in the year where you see about the 400, I think I said we were at 386 going into December 30th. It's close to what's on this schedule. But you also asked us to look at, okay, what if AES were not available? And so if you click once back up, so AES is represented by this 180 megawatt tall block. So that's what the new gap would look like if AES is not available. Now we all know that AES is going to be available in 2022, but we're looking at this. Basically what happens if they have a forced outage, and AES will talk about what their forecast is for that. So on top of the if AES were out, if you click, we show what might be nominal or normal D rates in the yellow box. D rates fluctuate, and we'll talk about that more. D rates is an area where maybe we can do, put some more emphasis and make this box smaller. So does this leave us enough room, if we're in this condition, to lose the largest unit? And the answer is mostly yes. You'll see that there's a little bit of overlap with those lines, but keep in mind that those blue lines don't include some of the measures I talked about, like demand response, which would raise the blue line, Some of the other items I'll talk about, being able to get a little bit more capacity out of existing units. But if all these things happened at one time, there are certain times where we would be tighter on generation for sure. If you look at where it dips a little bit further in August timeframe, that's specifically due to, Becca, can you do me a favor and click on one of the numbers on the bottom? If we go back and look at August of 2022, you'll see two K4 lines sticking up there. Those are outages that are planned right now, not to do work on Kahe 4. That's to do some reconductoring of some 138 kV lines coming out of Kahe. That's non-critical work. So we know that we can defer that if we need to. That was the window we put it in, because K3 and K4 would be out at the same time, but that's not mandatory. So we know if we get into a crunch, if you can click back on the blue line and chart. Yeah, so if we were to be in a crunch type situation there, we would actually defer that so that we had more margin. So we'll manage that. Now, after AES goes away, if you click, then the largest unit, with the D rates, and if you click again, then the largest unit would be either Kahe 5 or Kahe 6. Those two units are both 142. And so this is what we normally look at, is can we handle loss of the largest unit? And there's margin up to the colored line. Now you might ask, could we use the second largest unit and still be okay, which would be a great place to be. So if you click, it shows that for the most part, yes, we would. There's that time frame in first quarter 2023, primarily when KPLP is offline for maintenance, but partially when we have a couple other stack things. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to accommodate loss of the two largest units during that time period. That's not necessarily our criteria. I'm just showing that for knowledge and to understand what type of margin we would have. But certainly we'd be able to handle loss of the largest unit. So that would be a good thing. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. Now, even though I show that the colored line might be above all the boxes and everything, I think, this is made us take a look at things and put a little bit more emphasis and some urgency on figuring out, are there other things that we can do to raise that line, to raise that colored line, or to shrink that yellow box that I showed with the D rates. So, on the left, upper left, we talked about this already, the 3 projects, that if it's in red, it means that that's something that can be in place prior to AES retirement. If it's in black, it means that that would be something that goes into place after the retirement. So I think the upper left box we've talked a lot about. On the lower left box, we've talked a little bit more about storage at Westlock that we might be able to get in by the end of the year or early first quarter next year. Wouldn't help with the situation, any situation with AES prior to retirement, but might help with that first quarter area to give us more margin, and also be something that helps us down the line look at being able to retire other units. I need to mention that on the previous slides, I didn't show other stage 1 and stage 2 projects that are in the hopper. Mostly just for simplicity and because those don't have an immediate effect on the situation we're talking about today. But those are also still moving along, and I think we've talked about that. Substation DG is something we can continue to look at, but that takes time, 12 to 18 months from pulling the trigger to get that in place. On the second column, CT wet compression, not that everybody knows what that is. That's where we spray water into the combustion turbine and we can get 5 to 10 more megawatts out of it. It's not a system we would use on a regular basis all day, but we could use it during the peak. The reason I have it mentioned here is that, we tested all this when we put in CT1, but then we converted to biodiesel. And with biodiesel, the wet compression system wasn't very useful to us because we were limited by other factors. Now that we're using the biodiesel at Schofield and we're using diesel at CT1 again, we hadn't used that wet compression system for a while, so we've been doing testing on that to make sure that it is available to us. Same thing with the black start units. On paper, we've always said that we could tie those to the grid if we needed to, the black start units at CIP and at Kahe. But I don't know that we had ever done it until about 3 days ago. We tested it to make sure it could work, and that worked really well. I've talked about minimizing the D rates, doing that, shrinking the yellow box. You know, one good way to do that is kind of goes with the next column, where we can, we're looking at can we work double shifts to fix things, to get things done, and can we even shorten some of our planned outages such that we now have gaps between them, such that we can take other units down real quickly and fix some of the things that might be causing derates. So we are definitely looking at that. We had a task force put together last summer because of the retirement of AES and looking at what can we do to make sure that we're ready for that. One of those things that task force came up with was looking at our spare parts inventory, and we're just making sure that we have what we think we need to have on hand, so that if there is a problem that we can get it fixed promptly, and any derates or challenges that those might cause would be fixed quickly. The last thing in that column, deferring non-critical outages until more capabilities added, that's not what we want to do. That's a tool that we would consider whether or not we could do it and evaluate whether we could do it. It's not that easy to push things out at this point, but things change and maintenance schedules change a lot, so we'll keep that in mind. And then the last column is the ways to reduce demand, if we could do that. The first part where it says customer outreach, we're trying to be a little bit more aggressive on promoting just general conservation. That might help. The battery bonus project is well underway. We've been aggressively pursuing that. I think we have about 5 megawatts of applications approved. We're hoping to get 15 megawatts by the end of this year. The GSPA 1 and 2, we're catching up a little bit. We're targeting 15 megawatts by the end of the year. The GSPA 3, you see, has a question mark on it. That's a new RFP that would be going out. And RDLC, that's kind of yep.
Sorry to interrupt, just clarifying, GSPA 3 RFP did go out, so we're right at the end of negotiating that. And we had prioritized 2022 resources in that RFP, and so we do expect to have some contribution there, but we just can't disclose that right now because of where we're at in the negotiations.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. And then RDLC, like the water heater program, Energy Scout, things like that, we're looking to increase by 1 megawatt. And then on the bottom, we're evaluating what we might be able to do with commercial customers on the demand response side. So that was a real quick run through. Tried to stay within the time limit, but that completes our presentation portion.
Okay, thank you, Bob. If we can turn to, see, John and your team.
Sure.
Sure, thanks, Sandra. Our market business leader will get us kicked off.
Let us get the slides up. Okay, great. Aloha, everyone. My name is Sandra Larson. I am the AES Hawaii Market Business Leader. Today I'm here with John Bigaball, President of AES Hawaii and COO of US Conventional Generation. As Chief Operating Officer, he manages the US conventional generation fleet that includes coal, natural gas, steam, combined cycle gas turbine, and simple cycle generation plants with a combined capacity of approximately 3,600 megawatts. Also with us today is our council, Carl Calaboso from Yamamoto Calaboso. So Chair Griffin, Commissioner Potter, and Commissioner Asuncion, we really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we hear the Commission's sense of urgency to address electric system reliability concerns on Oahu following the New Year's Eve call for conservation by Hawaiian Electric. Our Barbers Point plant was operating at a reduced output during that time. It was at about approximately 80 megawatts, and since that event, our team has been working around the clock to restore the plant to 100% availability. And we're really very happy to report that we are back online and we will be at 100% later today. Just turning to the slides, just wanted to give a brief overview of what we'll be covering. AES's support of Hawaii's transition, overview of our Barbers Point facility and operations, generation on Oahu, operational performance of our facility, as well as AES's commitment to supporting a responsible, reliable energy transition in Hawaii. I just wanted to provide everyone with a little bit of background about AES first. At AES, we're accelerating the future of energy together with our customers, communities, and stakeholders. We have more than 40 years of global experience developing, operating, and innovating safe and reliable energy solutions. We're proud to be a leader of renewable energy deployment here in Hawaii and in 14 countries around the world. We're especially dedicated to lowering carbon emissions, and globally, we've committed to reducing our coal-fired generation to less than 10% of our portfolio by 2025. And since 2016, we've decommissioned 11,800 megawatts of coal, which is the second highest for any company in the US and is the first in terms of relative capacity. Through Fluence, which is our joint venture with Siemens, we are the global leader in energy storage with over 3,600 megawatts in operation, or that's contracted, which includes the Lawai and Kekaha projects on Kauai. We're uniquely combining new technologies to maximize carbon-free energy in our portfolio and for our customers to achieve their clean energy goals. Here in Hawaii, for nearly 30 years, our Barbers Point facility has been providing safe, affordable, and reliable energy to serve up to 20% of Oahu's energy needs. We very much share Hawaii's vision for a 100% renewable energy future, and we're now helping the state responsibly transition to a carbon energy future with renewable projects across the Hawaiian Islands. Our projects total over 200 megawatts of solar plus storage, hydro, and wind resources that are either in operation or under contract, which results in approximately $1 billion investment in the state of Hawaii, as well as creation of approximately 1,400 jobs. And with that, I'd like to turn it over now to John, who will be covering the details of our Barbers Point facility.
Thank you, Sandra, and aloha, everyone. As Sandra mentioned, we are very happy to report that we have resolved the recent interruptions at the facility and that the plant has been fully restored and will be at 100% availability later today. Barbers Point represents about 9% of the generation capacity on Oahu, but is providing over 18% of the island's electricity needs. We remain committed to continuing a safe operation of the plant, using best practices, and meeting our commitments to the balance of the PPA, which ends on September 1st of this year. We are proud of our reliability record for nearly 30 years of operating the plant. We have a top decile performance compared to other similar-sized coal generating units in the United States. We also are especially appreciative of our people who have dedicated their careers to ensuring the safe operation of the plant for our customer, our neighbors, and the Oahu community. Again, Barbers Point is nearing the end of its PPA term, September 1st of this year. Due to the poor coal quality received in 2019 and 2020 that caused severe backpass fouling, the boilers cannot maintain historical levels of reliability without expending an extensive amount of time offline to make repairs. Also, the integration of renewables changed the dispatch profile of the facility from a base load plant to significantly more cycling, which causes increased stress on the unit and leads to boiler tube degradation. Here we show how much cycling has occurred. The chart on the left shows how much the plant's hourly load profile has changed since 2018. It has been a dramatic change. And if you look to the table on the right, that shows how much cycling has increased. And basically, we're looking at the drops below 100 megawatts. In 2018, we had 1,113 drops below 100 megawatts. In 2021, 2,685. That's an increase in cycling of 141%. That has significantly increased the stress on the units. Also, on a positive note, though, the increase in cycling allows for higher renewable energy production. This gives you an overview of December and January. We had 4 events in December and January that caused the unit to be removed from service. In mid-December, we had a number of derates due to wet coal. This was the time period when I think there were record rains. And we lost both boilers due to water getting into the instrument air system. And then in early January, the turbine had to come offline because B boiler had a tube leak that was being repaired, and subsequently A boiler had a tube leak and the unit had to be removed from service. The unit then had an issue with the stop valve shortly after it was returned to service and had to be removed again to fix the stop valve. And lastly, the unit had to come off a 4th time because of a steam leak that was common to both boilers. Today, both boilers are back on and the unit should be available for full load later today. And once again, Barbers Point represents 9% of the generation capacity and 18% of the energy. And here you can see that in December, there was a projection of a 60% reserve margin. And then on New Year's Eve, there was a call for conservation. During this call for conservation, Barbers Point had 100 megawatts out of service and was providing 80 megawatts of energy. Now I'll talk a little bit about the reliability of the unit. Barbers Point has been and continues to be reliable. Even with an increase in E4 from poor coal quality and the damage it has done, as well as the increased cycling, 2020 and 2021 are near top quartile in equivalent availability factor, or EAF. And this is benchmarked against similar sized coal subcritical plants with flue gas desulfurization. And in this, the higher the number for EAF, the better the availability or performance of the plant. In regards to equivalent forced outage rate, or E4, where smaller numbers are better, 2019 and 2020 E4 was caused by fuel quality that fouled the backpass and damaged the tubes. We didn't actually experience or see the results of the damaged tubes until really 2021, and 19 and 20, the impacts to E4 there were because of backpass fouling where the backpass was plugged. And so we had to take the units off to clean the backpasses. And then as well, the increase in cycling contributed to the increase in E4. AES is working to reduce the number of boiler tube leaks. With the backpass fouling in 2020, there was extensive work to try to determine the cause of the fouling. And we implemented measures that we believe worked. And in 2021, you can see we believe you could see some of the results of that work. Unfortunately, the damage was done because when you have a fouled backpass, gas velocities increase, and that caused erosion in the backpass. Every time we have an opportunity during a tube leak outage, we always use our global experts to review the leaks and provide the repair recommendations. We perform an inspection of the combustor where we can get to, and we also do an inspection of the backpass during every outage. And we clean the backpass every outage because of the erosion that took place in 19 and 20. We want to try to minimize the velocities of the backpass. We also perform full hydrostatic tests after boiler tube leak repairs and to ensure the repair was successful and identify any additional leaks. And currently we're evaluating other options, such as installation of baffles in the backpass to stop the erosion. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. AES is committed to supporting a safe, responsible, and reliable energy transition. We are committed to meeting our service obligations regarding reliability, and we welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Sandra. Appreciate your willingness to be here on short notice and the information you presented to us. So I think we had put time in the schedule. Dean Nishina and his team have any questions for either group?
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I certainly defer to questions that the commission might have, but if you'd like to go with the order, I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask after those presentations.
Please go ahead, Dean. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I guess this question goes to Hawaiian Electric in terms of some of the measures. I think, Bob, that you're contemplating, either the ones that are already in progress or contemplating. I guess I kind of wanted to explore some of those measures. I don't know if it would be helpful to bring up that slide again, but I think some of the things that I didn't see was, whether or not Hawaiian Electric is working with Hawaii Energy in terms of energy efficiency measures that could be used to help bring down some of the load, from 2022 through, beyond, as well as I think in past meetings in terms of measures that, the company has. Have you reached out to, partners or essentially customers in terms of having like set actions that could be taken, fairly expeditiously depending on the situation with the generators? And what I'm talking about is, say reaching out to, the military, reaching out to Border Water Supply, because I think you folks have mentioned that that's what you do when it gets to a certain level. But are there already set measures that can be established even before we get there? So it's not like them trying to evaluate whether they can. They've already prepared themselves to take those measures depending on, where you folks are with your generation.
Yep. Hey, Dean, this is Jim Alberts. I'll coordinate for us, but I think this chart that Bob put up was meant to explore some of the new things. So we didn't want to put up all the list of everything else we had been working on. So we are actively working with Hawaii Energy. We do work with Border Water Supply and the Navy, and we have exercised those options recently. So there are many other things we work on beyond the things that are on this chart. So,
oh, sorry, go ahead and finish, Jim.
Well, I'm just going to let you ask another question then. Is there a specific one you're interested in beyond Border Water Supply, Navy?
And can I just add to that a little bit? I mean, we have talked about, while we have tapped into Border Water Supply and Navy, and they've been helpful, just as you're saying, Dean, we've talked about, given the outlook going forward and the potential of less reliability of AES, that we have a more formalized discussion with them about the potential need to tap into them more often and what that might look like. So that's on our list of things to do. We haven't had that discussion yet. On commercial customers, you can see at the bottom of the last column, the CNI commercial programs. That's while we have been reaching out to commercial customers to try and promote the things you see above and our normal demand response, we are talking about having a more aggressive marketing, having our key account managers more aggressively go out and promote these things, including another look at what generation, on-site generation customers already have to further tap into those as well. So these are things we've done before, but now just a more aggressive, more concerted effort in this current environment.
Okay.
And this is Colton.
So-
Dean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to add one more thing, I know you mentioned Hawaii Energy specifically. So it's this C&I commercial programs where we're looking for additional opportunities to get more response. That's one effort or area in which Yo's team is working with Hawaii Energy.
Okay, thank you. I think you folks touched on a couple of follow-up questions, but I guess what I wanted to explore is, I know you folks have worked with, say, the Navy and worked with Board of Water Supply. I guess, are there any other solutions that either, they or other large load customers might have brought up that might bear further evaluation in terms of having more demand response available in the next couple of years beyond that which you already have established with them? Again, just looking for new solutions, additional solutions beyond that which is already in place.
Yeah, Dean, there's none that come to mind for me right now based on discussions we've had with our commercial customers to date. But at the same time, as I said, we've been pushing the fast DR, we've been pushing battery bonus, we've been, as I mentioned, now looking at whatever potential fossil fuel units people may have on site that we could tap into. As you guys know, we already do that to some degree, but just another kind of sweeping the market to see what might be available given the situation.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the clarification, because it wasn't clear in terms of the C&I commercial programs. Were we talking about just the Hawaii Energy programs, or you folks are in fact going out to other customers besides, say, the military and Board of Water Supply, seeing whether there are additional loads that might now be either enrolled in some program or some agreement with Hawaiian Electric in terms of having greater levels of demand response?
Yeah, that would be included in those discussions.
Okay.
In addition to new programs that might be available. And don't forget, we also have our aggregators talking to commercial customers as well. So within the existing aggregators, there's already some large commercial customers who are already in process. And so when we talked about GSPA 1 and 2, there were, force majeure issues because of the pandemic, but we're hoping to catch up on some of that in 2022 based on our discussions with those aggregators. And there's already large commercial resources in the hopper. They just have to get finalized in 2022. So it's not like starting from scratch.
Okay. And while this chart is still up, I think with respect to the Westlock storage, is it where would it be possible to bring on a smaller increment in a shorter time frame? It's sort of like a phased approach, so rather than targeting, say, 20 megawatts of storage to add to Westlock, given the global supply chain, issues, I would think, possibly securing full 20 megawatts may be in question, but could you folks do, say, like 5 megawatts or maybe 10 megawatts, or have, phase implementation that could be possibly secured before the end of the year, or maybe shortly after AES, the AES co-facility is no longer available? Has the company contemplated that?
Why don't you take that one, Bob?
Yeah, so Dean, in this particular situation, I called up Tesla, who we've worked with in the past at potentially putting a battery out at Westlock, and I asked them what they have available. I asked them if they have any excess inventory. I was looking for 1 megawatt all the way up to 20 megawatts, and essentially what they said is that they had a large project that fell through in the queue, and so they're going to have more than 20 megawatts available that could be delivered here by the end of August. If it was 5 megawatts, it would still be delivered here by the end of August. So in this particular case, doing a smaller increment wouldn't really make it go any faster.
So with that disclosure is I mean, if it could be delivered here by August, just for sake of discussion, you know, what would be the time at which whatever Tesla could deliver, what would be the anticipated in-service date if that storage were contemplated or, I mean, pursued?
So we're looking at, you know, potentially the end of the year or soon thereafter. And let me modify my comment just a little bit. So battery supply wouldn't help. The other thing that we're trying to track down is, can we get the transformers that we need? Because we'll need probably about 6 or so transformers. Lead times for those can be long. If it turns out that we could get 3 transformers but not get all 6, then it might make sense to do a smaller increment. We're still exploring availability of transformers.
Okay. Sorry, I think those are all the follow-up questions that I have for now. So I'll defer to either State Energy Office or the Commission. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Let's turn to Scott Glenn from the Energy Office.
Thank you, Chair Griffin. Aloha, Sandra. Aloha, John. I have a couple of follow-up questions on your presentation, mainly to clarify and then probably yield the floor back to the Commission for their questions. I think, as you guys are aware, we're really looking to the coal plant energy for 2022. It's a critical path item for us to ensure that we can do the scheduled maintenance adjustments that HECO needs to get through while we build the other projects that we need for the post-coal plant energy, including several AES projects. A couple of questions I have is, you mentioned that you have retired coal plants in other jurisdictions, and I was wondering if you could compare and contrast your experience there with here, particularly in terms of some of these tube leaks and the cycling that you mentioned, and making sure that you're available for renewables here to accommodate them on the grid. Could you talk about how you've retired coal plants in other spots, and have you had this experience with kind of these breakages and cycling issues?
I think this is more of a specific case to Hawaii. You know, because of the poor coal quality that we got in 19 and 20 and the damage that it did, and then the significant, I guess in Chile, we've probably seen a big penetration of renewables as well. So that they didn't see the damage from fouling, they seen the cycling down in Chile. But that does put additional, you know, wear and tear on the boiler and thermal stress, and will increase the number of tube leaks that you had. I think, my own personal opinion, December and January were bad months. You know, this 2-on-1 configuration, 2 boilers on a single turbine is a pretty reliable system. Even with the number of tube leaks that we got in 19 and 20, we still maintain fairly high reliabilities. The issue is if you get tube leaks in both boilers at the same time, right? So, you know, I can't compare it to Chile. We've seen the increase in cycling with the renewables, and they came in overnight, and that caused issues, but they didn't have a fouled back pass. Or we don't have a fouled back, well, we kind of have a fouled back pass now, but the damage from the erosion has already occurred. And to repair that, it's multiple months. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
Thank you. I guess I'm glad you highlighted the timeline. That was very helpful. You know, we of course were paying attention to the flooding rains earlier in December as well, and had understood that coal had been impacted, it gotten wet. The sequence of events, I guess you mentioned, it's been a tough 1 or 2 months, and we have had a lot of extreme events happen over this period. I think one of the concerns we have and questions is there's been a lot of discussion about average situations, but I think we just went through an extreme situation. And to what degree are you guys planning ahead for any other potential extreme situations that could occur in 2022, rather than just looking at average energy reserve margin? And what things are you putting in place for what you're seeing might be coming through this year?
I mean, I don't think it's AES's place to look at reserve margins, right? It's AES's place to basically try to live up to its obligations, right? And this plant remains fully staffed and fully funded. We are performing maintenance. Now, regarding boiler maintenance, long lead boiler maintenance, outages, this has 7 months left, right? If we wanted to correct the issue that we have in the back pass, it's probably 2 to 3 months per boiler to correct that issue, because we have to cut the back of the boiler out and we have to weld in new bends, because the erosion, as the back pass bundles fouled, you got high velocities down the backside of the boiler, which eroded the tube ends, right? So the only way to get to those tube ends is to cut the back of the boiler out. So I mean, we're staying on top of all of our maintenance, right? But to take an extended outage like that to repair, I don't think that's going to help the island. And that's why, we had an outage slot in February, and we've offered it to Hawaiian Electric to use that time to improve the reliability of the units that are going to be here after September, right? We could use that time and we can try to make improvements. We can't make the improvements to that back pass. That's just too big a scope, but we can improve some of the tube leaks in the combustor. But that'll get us to September. We may improve E4 a little bit. So where's the time best utilized? And our folks in Hawaii had that discussion with Hawaiian Electric. And I think the conclusion was it's best served if Hawaiian Electric uses that time.
Thank you, John. And Chair, those were the two main clarifying questions I had at this point. So I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Scott. Let me turn to our commission staff. See, Dave or Caroline, do you guys have questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. Caroline, should I go first?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. John, I had a couple questions for you too, if I could follow up. You mentioned that you have, you're fully staffed, and you have, folks there in Hawaii here working on it. Is that going to be the case, going through the end of the term? Do you have, all the parts and supporting equipment and everything, through the end of the term as well?
We do, and we believe we have a program in place to keep our workforce there as well to the end of the PPA. And so far it's going well. We did have a lot of people turnover a few years ago, but that seems to have calmed down. And hopefully everybody at the plant's committed to get to the end. As far as spare parts, we have them. When we get these tube leaks, we try to turn these things around in 3 to 5 days. We work round the clock. We bring in all the resources we possibly can. So we are committed to turn that boiler around anytime we get a tube leak as fast as possible. And if you look at that timeline, one of the things we all talk about, the physical aspects of this. When you look at that timeline, that's 50 to 75 people working round the clock to get this thing back online. And I'm sure it's the same for Hawaiian Electric's plants. And we don't necessarily talk too much about that. So the folks are pretty tired.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's great to hear that, that you've been able to resolve the issues that, that you've had in the last month or so. Do you think that that's taken care of now and that you expect to be fully capable, through the end of the term, or are you anticipating further issues, along the lines that you've seen, or are you anticipating, potential for other issues over the next few months?
So I think we went through a tough couple of months with turbine, right? We don't typically expect turbine issues. It's kind of interesting in a 2-on-1 configuration. it's rare that the turbine comes off, and when it does, it generally gives you problems starting back up. We experienced that in one event. So we do expect tube leaks to continue. And like I said, those are typically 3 to 5 day outage turnarounds. And, unless we have 2 tube leaks coincide like we did earlier in January, it should run similar than it has the past couple of years.
Okay. And, are there any other, you mentioned that, first there's something that you can think of in terms of sort of major maintenance that could potentially help improve reliability, but that, that would come at a, the significant trade-off in terms of having an extended outage. For that, is there anything else that, you've thought of or have considered that would reduce the risk of further outages for the next few months in terms of, other kinds of maintenance that could be done, operational adjustments that could be coordinated with Hawaiian Electric, any other kinds of mitigation actions that you've considered?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at putting baffles in, right, in the back pass, because we know where the erosion is. It's in that back wall. And we're looking at the possibility of putting baffles in, where we order the baffles, and then if you have a tube leak, we'd install as many baffles as we can. But I'm sure, depending on the circumstances, it's generally when you have a tube leak is to turn the boiler around and get it back up online as quick as possible. Anything major inside the combustor, the other area where we have tube leaks, which predominantly I would say are caused by the heavy cycling, to do any type of work, inspections all the way up, that's several days. That's typically a 7-day, because we have to scaffold all the way up to the top of the boiler.
Okay, are there any other potential problems that you're anticipating might, besides the ones that you've experienced, that you say have addressed?
No, it's hard to anticipate anything that may happen in a power plant. I mean, I think the thing that we anticipate are the leaks that we're getting in the combustor, predominantly probably, from the cycling, and then because of the eroded tubes in the back pass, right? I mean, that's what I can't tell you that, we're going to have one next week. I don't think we use all kinds of different ways of inspecting boilers, including robots. And to date, I haven't heard of anybody that can predict when a tube leak's going to happen.
No, understood. I'm not asking you to predict the future. I'm asking if there are other issues that you're aware of that, you're anticipating could come up. Like you were aware that you had bad coal and it caused problems for a couple of years. That's kind of where I'm coming from with that question.
No, there's the other, it's predominantly the tube leaks is what we're aware of.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, John. I did have a question for Bob, if I could, Chair. Bob, this is about the D rates. So you indicated in one of your slides that 110 megawatts is typical, and I'm wondering sort of how often throughout the year are you sort of experiencing that level? Just noting that going into the New Year's event, the D rates were at 180, and then during the event were more than double your 110 typical level. So how often, what's the range on the D rates that you experience, and how often are you around the 110 versus other levels?
Yeah, so Mike DiCaprio can help me answer this question. He's a little closer to it, but in the graph, I want to make it clear. I'm not saying that that's what D rates will be. I just used a nominal amount that I thought would be appropriate, and I'm looking at it as D rates during the peak. In other words, for example, on that New Year's Eve, we had one of our units derated by 54 megawatts. But in reality, we were able to get an additional 51 out of it because it was just during the peak. We're not going to run that way all day. So it's a derate from a 24/7 type operation, but we can't. So what would you say, Mike? 110, it's hard to put a number on it. Some units are always going to have small D rates, like less than 10 megawatts, because over time things get fouled and we just need a chance to take them off and clean them. But
D rates are caused normally by one of two reasons. One is equipment malfunction, and those we could take pretty quick actions to repair normally. The other form of a D rate is operational because of, as Bob indicated, boiler or air heater fouling, which with the way these steam units are operating with a large part of the day at low loads or cycling on and offline or operating at what we have called in other forums the enhanced low load operation down to 10 megawatts. That causes fouling in the air heaters and corrosion of certain components that causes us to run out of air or the ability to get the unit to full load. And those are usually not correctable until we have a maintenance outage. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that the 110 megawatts that Bob estimated is a reasonable estimate for what we would have on a normal particular day.
Okay, thanks. And I'm just, how high does it sometimes go? If it's typically 110, any given day is derated in total, how high do you sometimes see it get to?
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. If it's a really bad situation where we had a bunch of things happen short term, we can see it get to 200 megawatts. In the slides that I provided also, when K5 tripped and then it came partially back, we called that a D rate. It was really caused by a trip. So, that number's, it's just, we got to look at what the meat is in it. But, we could have legitimate, D rates, I would say up to 200 megawatts at times.
Okay, thanks, Bob and Mike. I just had one other question, which is about the DR. The slide, indicated the potential to potentially get another megawatt of DR. That seems really low to me. I'm just curious, when you guys think about the potential that's out there, is that really the extent of the, sort of market that could be tapped to, to help provide some additional reserves?
Dave, I'll take that and then you can fill in. But, I asked the same question and it's a 2022 number that's included in that slide. And for RDLC, the thinking was that we have to go in and request commission approval to do that and to get cost recovery for the customer incentives and all of that kind of stuff. So the thought was that for the initial ask, we'll go for 1 megawatt and we'll see what kind of uptake we have in adoption. And with enough time, if we're seeing that happen, then we can ask for additional megawatts. But Yo, you want to add to that?
No, unless Dave has further questions. Thank you, Shelly. That's where we are, and it's been a while since we've done a potential study on water heaters, so when we do the marketing, we'll find out more on the uptake.
Okay, all right, thanks. I guess I'll just encourage you to think big along these lines, in thinking about the relative cost of expanding these programs, compared to some of the other options that, that we have. So, but thanks for
Appreciate that. You gave me the context that 1 megawatt is about 4,000 customers. And part of the strategy is to go after the new condos in Kaka'ako that now have, there's been kind of a shift in development where individual units have individual water heaters. So that's one strategy to kind of get a lot at one time. But there's, obviously more strategies to do that, to also just do a broad sweep of interest for residential customers. And then I already talked about the commercial.
thanks. That, that's all the questions I have for now. Chair, thanks to everybody for your responses.
I just had a couple of questions as well, if there's time.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. The first question is more for Bob, I think, but you had mentioned it's hard for you to measure the exact effect of the call for conservation, and I was just wondering how you estimate it at all, and then whether you know of other jurisdictions where they're able to measure it more precisely and how that works.
I'm hoping Kevin might be able to shed a little bit of light on what we look at.
May I ask the question again, please?
Oh, sure. The question was just how you estimate the effect of the call for conservation when you do one, because Bob had mentioned it's sort of hard to measure, and then also whether there's any jurisdictions or techniques from elsewhere that you know of that people use for that.
Yeah, that slide that Bob showed you, there's different thresholds for different conditions, right? And so, in the normal world, in alpha and beta conditions, that's normal. But once we start seeping into condition 1, we start to consider, based on the real-time assessment of the status of the units at the time, at the moment, we start to consider our I guess our operating procedures or our protocols, right? And these are the tactics we can do to keep us out of load shed or brownouts, right? So at condition 1, we're already considering these protocols, right? And then that night, right, we quickly went from 1 to normal, and then from normal to condition 3. When it comes to condition 3, we have to act. Yeah. So those considerations in the previous threshold now becomes 2 actions, and we have to decide based on what the risks are at the moment. And so that's when we pull the trigger for conservation. And then when we always ask for conservation, it's the consideration for the customers. We need to, the preparedness is we need to at least give the consideration to the public to have enough time. And then there's other operations in our commercial customers to give them the time to ensure that they can shed their load as well.
Hey, Kevin, hey, could I interrupt for just a second? This is Jim Alberts. I mean, it might be helpful for you to describe, Kevin, kind of your interpretation of the value of that request to customers. So when you look at the load charts and you see that drop off, and then when we end the event, it jumps back up. So you can kind of interpretively see the value of that.
Yeah,
You
good
just
point.
want to describe that.
Yeah, good point, Jimmy. In our operating experience in the real world, right? And when we anticipate these things to happen, we call for conservation, we ask for the load control programs to shed load and what have you. And so we kind of anticipate, okay, we really don't know how much, but we know it'll help, right? And so when we anticipate a certain peak amount, we're forecasting 1,000, let's just say rounded number. We know that with the community's participation with the load control programs, we'll get help. And so that'll ease the peak there. And what usually happens too, we also anticipate coming out of the peak as well. Like Jim said, there's always a snap back when people start turning back their load on, or when the load control, the demand response starts returning, right? So these are all these considerations in real time that we pull the trigger. But that's how we anticipate going into the evening peak. And again, right, timing is of essence. Yeah.
Maybe I can add just a little bit to that. So the system operation folks, they look at the load coming up, especially on days like this, and they kind of anticipate what that load curve is going to look like based on the how fast it's ramping, what it normally looks like every day. When we call for conservation, we do other things. Then typically it'll end up looking slightly different than maybe what we anticipated to be. And so then they have to interpret whether or not that difference was due to some of the other measures we took or due for the call of conservation. And that's why we can get a little bit of feel for it, but we can't say for certain exactly how much it was. As far as your question about how do other jurisdictions measure that, I don't know that we're aware that
Yeah, Bob, I can jump in. I can jump in on that last part.
Okay.
So Caroline, as Bob said, really, and Kevin alluded to, we as an industry, when it's not an specific end use load or program load, generally what we do is we look at loadings either at the system level or at the substation level, depending upon what kind of reduction we're looking for. And then we look at what we actually see versus either what we had forecasted for the time frame or what we have seen, see the day before under similar circumstances. And that gives us an estimate of what the potential impact of a call for conservation could have had. But, you know, in the case for December 31st for us, right, that change is going to come from a combination of a call for conservation. It's going to come from specific actions taken by the Board of Water Supply and the Navy and things like that. So it gives you an estimate, doesn't really give you that sort of precise. And I think that general practice of comparing what you measure versus what you forecast or what you have seen recently is what the industry does. For specific programs, you know, where you have either metering device or SCADA to that customer load, that those are the opportunities to do more direct measurements. But that would be like under a program or something.
Thanks, that was helpful. Chair, I don't have any additional questions right now, just in the interest of time, but I think Stephen Mariani from our staff has one question, so I was going to pass it to him if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, Stephen.
Chair and Caroline, sorry if there's a bit of background noise, but I was wondering if HECO could respond to the data the AES showed and the claims that were made about the cycling for the coal plant since 2018, just whether they agree that this is largely a result of increased renewables. I think it might be helpful to see some more data from HECO about increased penetration of renewables over the same time period since 2018, and also whether we could analyze the dispatch data from the rest of the HECO fleet. And this would be the interest of seeing if there's maybe any other factors causing cycling, such as economic dispatch of the other plants that could contribute to the increase in cycling. Thanks.
Colton, do you want to start on that one and then we can add in?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. I'm actually glad you asked the question because I wanted to do a little bit of clarification because I think what John said is accurate, but I think we tend to use different terms and definitions of terms. And so for folks at the CA's office, State Energy Office, PUC, we've had a lot of conversations about how we run the system. For our Hawaiian electric systems, when we use the term cycling, we're talking about taking a power plant and regularly, daily or weekly or whatever that might be, turning the unit completely off, shutting it down, right? And the next morning, starting it back up, whether it's a combustion turbine or like what we do on our steam units to turn off completely that steam unit. I think, and John, please jump in if I don't have it right. I think when John was using the term cycling, it was more sort of like the US North America definition, where cycling is defined as where you take the output of a power plant and you reduce its output down to a lower level, say overnight or in the middle of the day, and then you ramp it up at times when you need more capacity. And you're cycling the output levels, but you're not cycling or turning off either the boiler or the entire plant. So I think that's one thing I just really want to mention, kind of going into your question, Stephen. In terms of, can we, in looking at the material that John provided, and have we seen that, and is it driven by renewables? So what I'll say two things. Number one, at the system level, using Oahu as the example, we are seeing significantly less system load in the middle of the day. I mean, that shouldn't be a surprise to any of us, right? We have had a tremendous increase in the amount of behind the meter generation by our customers, conservations, new uses of loads that uses energy at different times of the day. And all of those things have contributed to significantly less power and energy being used or being asked of the grid during the middle of the day. The usage may still be similar, but it's coming from behind the meter resources. So that's absolutely true and ties, I think, to the charts that John had talked about. In terms of, well, how does a system change in load curve affect AES? AES is on an energy basis in dispatch, the cheapest unit to run. So basically what happens on, you're not putting aside any operational restrictions or issues, pretty much every other unit will turn down its output or cycle off before our economic dispatch will direct AES to lower its output from what it is capable of doing, right? And that general practice of either turning down or cycling off other units, I'm talking about dispatchable fossil units, by the way, are all done ahead of AES. But because there's a lot of as available generation, because there's a lot of behind the meter generation, over time, we've seen a need to more regularly dispatch down the output from AES, kind of consistent with what John has showed. I hope that answers your question, Steve, and others from the HECO team can jump in.
Just Colton. Yep, that was very helpful. That was the only question I had. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Asuncion.
Thanks, Chair. I have a couple of questions for both AES and HECO. So I'll start probably with AES, and either John or Sandra, you guys can educate me on something that's been on my mind. Where is AES right now in terms of the decommissioning of the coal plant? I mean, my assumption is that it's kind of phased, right? It's phased down versus flipping the switch off on September 1st and then decommissioning, right? And taking it all down. Am I correct in my assumption, or if I'm not correct, then maybe that question goes away. But then, where are you folks in the decommissioning?
Sure. I mean, we're planning it now, and what we have in our plans is that we will shut down on September 1st. September 1st through December, we will make the plant safe, which will be getting rid of a lot of the the lube oil, right? Making some of the electrical systems safe, and then next year we'll be starting demolition. That's our current plan.
Okay, so it just keeps running all the way until September 1st.
September 1st, and then it shuts off, and it doesn't return.
Okay. Okay. And so if it's not ramped down, the assumption is, right, like you said, you can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, right, to something, and you could probably predict based on what's been happening the past couple of years, tube leaks, blah blah blah. You can try to prepare for those. So worst case scenario, what if it's something worse than a tube leak, right? What happens then? Is it really you're going to be offline 2-3 months, 4 months, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer that, to be honest. I mean, I know what happens in industry generally when you're coming down to that shutdown period. Depending on how significant the damage is, it becomes not worthwhile to bring it back.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that being said, we know the condition of the boilers. They are what they are, but all of the equipment is what we can maintain. And this plant is a redundant plant. It's 2-on-1 configuration. We have redundant feed pumps, so we can work on maintenance, and we have been. So we're not that worried about the rest of the plant. right? We know we're going to have tube leaks because of the fouling that occurred in 19 and 20. And the increase in, you know, I don't know what term to use, but coal plants don't tend to like to go up and, you know, min-gen to full load several times per day. In particular, you know, this type of plant, it's actually a quite amazing plant because we have other circulating fluidized beds that do not respond as well as this plant. But the technology, that boiler is full of refractory. And so when you put those thermal cycles, and when I say cycles, I mean down to min-gen and back up to full load, that has an impact on that refractory, right? And if the refractory comes off, it creates an eddy because of the design, which will eat into a tube. And that's what we've been seeing.
Okay.
Okay, but I think we can expect tube leaks, right? But I don't foresee the folks I've talked to at the plant that are maintaining this, we're keeping on top of everything else. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. And thanks for touching upon the cycling and the impact. That was my other question, given Colton's definition earlier, right? My question was going to be, which one is more damaging? And I guess it depends on the type of unit.
It's the type, yeah, it's the type of the unit. Like this unit, if you shut it off every night and turned it back on, the reliability wouldn't be reliable at all. Just because of you couldn't let it get to those temperatures because of the amount of refractory.
Okay. Let me ask this one last question of you folks. Do you guys have any control or predictability or can predict the reliability of HECO's grid at any point in time?
I've heard, I haven't seen, that we get a generation report, that the plant gets it. It's a confidential report. Plant doesn't share it, but that provides the plant some insight to, where the system's at that given point in time.
Okay. But at the time of the report, that's the projected for the day or whatever.
That's my understanding. I have never seen the report, but we can't predict. We could if we had all the information. There's a lot of people that could predict reliability, but we don't have that information.
Okay. All right. And I guess a couple of questions for HECO. Maybe first, Shelley, you mentioned something, fossil fuel customer generation. What is that? Or can you clarify when you
It's
say
like
that?
when customers have on-site backup generation. And I don't know if you want to add any more detail to that.
Yes, Commissioner Sancian, for one of the older demand response program, we actually have customer-sided generators participating in demand response programs. So when we call it, they would move their load onto that generator while that demand response event is going. But that has been participating. We have maybe 3 or 4 generators on Oahu and then another handful on Maui that is doing that. With that said, for the future aggregators and the newer programs, we've been not actively pursuing that route as one of the commission order pursued that all the grid service resource should be from clean energy. So we were not pursuing that, but this is an urgent situation. So our commitment is to redo a generator potential study to see who's out there. And it is an emergency system backup load, Commissioner Sancian. So we do have to investigate to see if just because it's a 1 megawatt generator, it doesn't mean that the load that's getting moved to that generator is going to be 1 megawatt. So we had to do some assessment to see what that potential looks like. And we would like to propose to the commission, these are low-hanging fruits. These will require some investment, past year type investment, and to bring them online.
Okay. And maybe if I was stick on that line, because I think it's related. I think, off of Bob's last slide, where we have megawatt numbers, and I tried to write them down, like battery bonus 5 to 15 megawatts, right? GSPA 1 and 2, 15 megawatts. 3, we couldn't disclose it yet. or DLC 1 megawatt, right? Shelley, you clarified that those are 2022 numbers. But are those like the projected numbers, like battery bonus, right? I thought we were hoping for more, but I know there's been, right, a lot of issues surrounding that and getting that going, and whether or not there is, right, the market desire even to have that. But so you guys are looking at anywhere between 5 to 15 megawatts in 2022, and I guess assuming, because it was marked red, that's as of, right, September 1, right? That's what we might be able to get from battery bonus.
Yeah, so just clarify, I mean, maybe embedded in your question is why not more? So obviously we're gonna go get as much as we can get. We just estimated based on the linear projection of what the adoption rate has been so far and where we think it's gonna be. And so of course, we're gonna keep trying for more, but that was just an estimate based on what we see so far.
Okay. Okay.
And Commissioner, if I may add just one statement to that, we did meet for the quarterly battery bonus meeting, and there was a discussion on how we can accelerate. So today, a few minutes ago, there was a meeting with the DER stakeholders to talk about this, and there's another meeting on Monday to discuss. So we are trying to come up with that, and we will propose that to the Commission on how we would like to accelerate this program further together.
Okay. And that's, I guess, kind of related to this is, right, how do we use those numbers, right? I mean, right, you start to, right, do we use, right, that we hope to get 50 megawatts or whatever, or do we use the high end, or do we use, right, this 5 to 15 range when we're looking at as you start to plan for everything else, right? I guess, right, I mean, that's important because, right, you could either be on the short side of it or you could be on the long side of it as well, right? It's a crapshoot, right? It's 50-50. Well, whatever the odds are when you shoot craps, right? I mean, that's right. I think that's what we're dealing with here, right? That there's a sense of what are the right numbers so that we know what it's really going to look like as far as reliability for HECO, right? Versus what is a projected or high range, whatever you want to call it, right? Optimal or whatever, right? I think what we're really dealing with is what is the exacts, right? So I think the best that we can get those numbers straightened out, I mean, that helps us, right? And it helps us as how we look at the system versus what it could be, right? I mean, because we're talking this year, right? We're not talking 23, 24, 25 or outwards, right? We talk about this year. We're trying to resolve this year when AES has to terminate. So I take that as my, something that I would like to see, that we hone in a little bit more on those numbers. I just want to go back a little bit on right, the energy reserve margin chart that I think AES had one in there, and that was from HECO's December report that was filed. And then also, Bob, you had the energy reserve margin. Okay, my understanding is that in December 2021, there was a 60% energy reserve margin that everyone was planning for, right? Or using that 60%. And then, so given the last 3 weeks where we had, right, events where we had to call for conservation or very close to calling for conservation from our customers, and then, right, this time of year is usually the low demand part of the year, right? It's not really that significant. Can you give me an idea what reserve margin you folks are going to manage to, when the demand goes up, and especially when, right, come September 1st, when AES is no longer there?
Colton, maybe you want to start with the planning margins, and then if Bob's got anything he wants to add on his chart specifically, we can transfer.
Sure. And I'll also invite Mark Asano, who actually knows this a little bit better than I do on the ERM side. So, Commissioner, so the energy reserve margin is a planning tool that we use to establish a criteria by which we determine whether or not we have sufficient generation adequacy on our system to meet that criteria or not. And it's really focused more on determining adequacy from a longer term perspective. And so the ERM tool and methodology is really more actually focused looking on annual adequacy, although we do look at every day. But as part of it being used primarily for a longer term determination of resource adequacy, we use, a maintenance schedule, we use a load forecast. But for things that are not forecastable or not as predictable, things like forced outages, unscheduled outages on plants, those things are not explicitly included within the calculation of an ERM. Instead, those kinds of things are more captured within the reserve by establishing a reserve margin of 30%, right? And that forced outages, derates, those kinds of things will be real reductions in the amount of generation that's available. But the premise of an ERM is that those factors will be covered by having the 30% energy reserve margin. So that's a limitation, I would say, to how ERM factors in the more operational day-to-day activities that can result in, when you look at a period of time, especially a short period of time, using an ERM planning tool. And then if you take, say, one of Bob's charts where he looks at a specific day, not just what units are in maintenance, but what units are in derates, what units have unplanned trips or other kinds of things like fuel limitations, you can begin to see differences between what a planning analysis shows for that period versus what you actually get. Now, having said that, I think there's pretty good correlation between what ERM calculates versus what you see operationally when you account for the fact that you want to establish a planning criteria that balances risk on either way, right? You don't want something that's too, say, aggressive or something that's too conservative. And when you look at historically on real operational performance, you try to establish that ERM based on that. I think we just did our filing. I think it's now with the commission, I think maybe while this meeting has started. But one of the things that I think we've been asked and we're starting to do is to work with stakeholders to say, okay, and this kind of goes back to, I think, what Scott Glenn had asked about earlier. Are we seeing more extreme events, whether it's load, whether it's unit performance, and should the 30% ERM as your threshold in your criteria, is that still appropriate? Because it's been based upon historical. We did a lot of correlation, did a lot of testing with others, including HNEI. But going forward, should that be a number that should be changed? We believe we should at least look at it to see whether it should be changed or not. Again, for the purposes of developing resource adequacy in our resource plans more longer term. Mark or Bob? Anything to add?
Yeah, nothing to add unless, Commissioner, you had some detailed follow-up. I can speak more specifically to anything.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks for the explanation, Colton. No, I don't have any questions. I think they were all asked and answered. Yeah, I think the best thing, right, is, and I know you folks do this, having been there myself, right, to continually look at right, your modeling, your projections, and all of that. I mean, like I said, right, we're talking about something that's going to happen in the very near term, right, this year, and in a couple of months, right, when AES is gone. I think that's been the critical point for all of us, right, and to make sure that we're prepared. So to go back and continually look at these projections and see what needs to be done, right? Hopefully it's things within your control, because once it's not in your control, that it depends on others, such as the commission, to make a decision, right? That's going to take some time, right? But if I can ask you folks to continually keep doing that, and then see where we can, make sure that we will be prepared the day AES goes offline, right? That we're not going to have too many snags after that. We already have a few that's kind of brewing. So encourage you folks to continue to do that work, to continue to look at, right, how we can avoid something very, very worse come September 2nd. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Potter.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to keep this relatively brief because we're running out of time, and I also want to commend everyone for their excellent questions so far. They've taken most of them from me, so asked and answered, as Commissioner Asuncion said. So first, I think it's more of just like kind of guidance. I was really happy to see in the demand reduction that you have customer education listed there. And this is really critical in particular for future conservation events. Hopefully we won't need them, but there is California has done an excellent job of socializing Flex Your Power with all residents of California. And so what they've done is just outreach and education, and to let people know that there's, peak hours are necessary for load reduction, in particular on days where system conditions mandate it. So that's just one opportunity, I think, for the companies to consider, of just getting ahead and being more proactive about customer education and customer outreach on the conservation days. I'm not sure, just to Shelley, is that something that's on your radar and that you're probably already thinking about doing? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that, Commissioner Potter. I appreciate that. And we'll take a hard look at what's happening in California, but that was on our radar, and we included it in a mention of it in our letter on last Friday, I believe. But that is something we're taking a much harder look at.
Great. That's great news. Thank you. I want to make one comment too to AES. I am very grateful for your commitment to continue operations through September, and that just was music to my ears. So thank you. I don't have any questions for you at this time, though. I do want to follow up. I'm going to switch back over to demand response really quick. So you mentioned the RDLC and then also the GSP number 3, and that you were focusing on resources in 2022. And it is already almost February, and the commission does not have anything in front of them. So I'm hoping that can you tell me about your plans on getting us any type of application in the near future?
Yo, why don't you take that one?
Shelley. Thank you, Commissioner Potter. The GSP 3 negotiation has been ongoing, and we are very close to agreeing with the contracts. So we're hoping to submit a contract to the Commission for approval very soon, within weeks, or actually I would use the word days, to get that going. In regards to, so that's GSP 3, we're very close to getting that over to the Commission's office. RDLC, we're a little bit more behind on that one. Initially, we were targeting this RFP that we issued last year to be focused on replacement of the RDLC technology, but looking at this opportunity, we're looking to seek commission approval and guidance to not only seek replacement of old technology, the one-way paging technology, to be two-way, but to also use it as an expansion. So that RFP bids are coming in next week, and we will make a swift decision on who the technology will be, who the installers will be, and we will get that sorted out and submit that to the commission. Targeting Commissioner Potter, hopefully end of February, early March, we can get that over to the commission for request of approval.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Yo. I appreciate it. We look forward to seeing that. Chair, that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks everyone for your time. I'm going to try and be brief here, but I guess I just want to start with, let's not miss what happened on New Year's. Understand that we got to heed the wake-up call from that event. Everyone's got to be all hands on. We need our diligence and execution on every single piece of this plan here, all through the year, this year, next year, and 2024, because there's a bunch of knock-on effects. But when I read a bunch of what we have, I don't see that that alarm bell still not ringing. So let me just step through a few things. So Bob, if you can put up your slide on, I think it was one, your second or third, it showed the scheduled maintenance plan. And I just want to double check my understanding. Next, I think, go forward, please. This was helpful. Yes, this one. So just so we're all on the same understanding, right? This 2022, right? You're cycling through all these plants so that you have that gap September to November. So all those plants can be online to give us the extra reserve as AES goes offline. And the challenge that we've been through in the past few weeks is that, being able to do that depends on all the other plants that are online operating as expected. And what we experience with AES offline or cycling back and forth, it starts to trip up, this planned schedule here. So the clarity is that, right, being able to do this depends on all the other units operating at least kind of at their average performance, correct?
Yes, to the extent that we still do have margin for some things not to operate, but yes, if other units go out on forced maintenance, we may have to push out doing planned maintenance. That is true.
And if we get off path here, like if other things have to stay online and not come off,
right,
as you have on here, what starts happening, not just this year, but look into the following years, right? Because these are on a multi-month schedule. So, as the risk propagate forward into the subsequent years.
Right. And that's, one of the things I had mentioned was some of those boxes in 2022, especially if you look at the ones that say are on top of YL 8, we're looking at ways to make those boxes skinnier so that if unexpected things do happen, then we have a window to be able to take something down, without rearranging everything else. And the way we would make those skinnier is we're taking a serious look at, can we just work double shifts? Can we do things? Can we expedite materials? Having that sense of urgency that you're talking about to try to be able to accommodate more things going wrong.
Okay, so we have something, as it's presented, you feel like there's safe enough margins, but, if we get off path, that's a problem. And what we saw in the first few weeks this year, an event unanticipated, taking us off path. And again, we're trying to heed the wake-up call here, trying to get everyone, it's going to be all hands, including, that's why we asked AES to be here, so they understand their role in this as well. We'll get to that, but just, all parts of the company need to be on this, as well as the other companies and entities that we're trying to bring online. So I just don't want, because the risk can start to compound. If you can't do this scheduled maintenance, probabilities of multiple units going out at the same time, that stacked bar you showed in a later slide where you start to run into, like, those probabilities go up, right? Okay. What concerns, another thing that, go ahead.
Sorry, if you don't mind, I was just going to respond that I want to assure you that we've had discussions 2 weeks ago as an executive team, and the transition of AES is our top priority, and it is all hands-on, and we've all agreed that this is, if nothing else in 2022, that is our main focus. We have lots of other priorities, but when we're making decisions about resources and focus, this is the priority focus.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Shelley. But I look at, the letter sent to us on January 14th. First sentence on the reliability assessment says the company currently does not project generation for shortfalls through the near term. I mean, that was 2 weeks after we just had one. So again, the kind of all hands on, there's a lack of disconnect between people doing these projections and what we see here. And my concern is really what's the risk here is that these new additions are going to are the elements that reduce the risk. And in your graph here, Bob, you've, at least to my knowledge, the timeline on 3 of these projects has slipped from what you reported at the end of December. And so, our effort as a group through the Powering Past Coal Task Force, through all of this, is to try to hold the line and speed up projects, because these are what's going to reduce the risk of the transition. Everything else is relying on all these other existing old units, which we've heard, the challenges of that. So we need to be hands-on about bringing everything new on. But your graph here is already projecting delays.
I would just say we agree 100% with what you just said, that we need to do everything we can do to get those projects on as soon as we can.
Okay. Shelley, what I appreciate in the beginning, you talked about you have a cross-functional team working on this. So I think that's right what we're talking about. We need each element of the company working on different aspects, working off the same picture, bringing everything online sooner, trying to reduce the risk here. So I get that team's reporting to you.
Yeah, so operational folks are reporting to Jim, and then between Jim and Colton, they're both reporting to me, as well as others in our company that have a role in this. So like Jim Kelly on the customer outreach, on the communications, Joe Viola also has the customer side and regulatory side. So all of that comes together at my level. And so we're monitoring that and focused on that.
Okay, and the concerted focus of everyone here is shifting these new resources left, moving the line up, right? The reserve line, holding the line where we can. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess if we could shift focus to John, maybe from AES. I think you can put the screen share down. So your last bullet, I don't have it here, but did talk about AES's commitment to reliability through the end of the term. And so, we just talked through this. You understand, or what I take away, I have a better insight on are the existing operational challenges of the plant. Some of them, it's going to take too much time to try and restore fully. But what you've been telling us all along, it's going to be all hands on to try and manage what you have through the end of the term. That's your commitment to all of us here. And you understand that plant's role in this transition plan.
We do. We do, and it will continue. If there's a leak, we will work round the clock to get that unit back up.
Okay. That's appreciated. But just the commission has given guidance to Hawaiian Electric in upcoming RFP to at least add evaluation criteria for new bids, looking at performance under existing PPAs. This would apply to anyone with an existing PPA. So, what we're looking, I mean, the impact of the current can affect the future. Are we all on the same page here? We're working together to make this transition for all the people on this island. We're gonna have other events like this for the other islands, and this is what we all need to do to pull together. We all understand?
Absolutely, and appreciate that framing, Chair.
Okay, that's final question for me. All I have to say, I do want to thank you all. We did finish early, so thank you for that. Thanks for everyone's participation. Look forward to further discussions, and you have our commission's commitment to pull our end here. I believe we have been doing that, but that will continue. So thank you all. Have a good rest of the day and good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.